Today is March 26, 2025. We're here today with Regina Gill, the founder and executive director of the Gold Coast Art Center on Middle Neck Road in Great Neck. Hi, Regina.
Hi, how are you, Kristen?
Welcome.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about what brought you to Great Neck.
Well, Great Neck had always had a tremendous reputation. We were in Queens, my husband and I, and we had two little children, 3 and 4.5. And as the 4.5 started to get to kindergarten age, we looked around and we realized that Great Neck schools were where we wanted to be. We had explored the South Shore, we had explored Westchester, we had explored, but because of the North Shore Community Art Center, which had been here in Great Neck for, I think, since 1951-ish, I'm not sure exact date, as a professional artist and having been trained in Manhattan all my life in the arts, I said, this is where I want it. Let's give it a shot. My husband said, great. We came, we looked, we found. And we ended up moving here in 1976, which was the bicentennial. So it was kind of a fun year to join a community that was very politically active, historically active, great place for children. So it turned out to be a great reason.
And tell me a little bit about the neighborhood that you chose here in Great Neck.
We chose Harbor Hills. Harbor Hills is off the coast of Bayview Avenue. But Harbor Hills is one of those gems of a community where you have a community, at that time you had a community bus, which was very helpful to me because the community bus would pick, we were a one-car family at that point. So this way my husband could get on the bus and be driven to the train. It made regular travels to the train. It picked up children from school. It was a real, it picked up housekeepers if they were required. And so there was that. There was a community pool. There was a community tennis court. There was a lot of community in a very small patch of ground. So it was one person's estate at one time. We have a tree in front of our house that was planted according to the people from the tree service. One must have been planted 200 years ago. And it's a linden tree. I don't know if you know the linden tree.
Lindenhurst is named for
After
it.
the tree.
Yes.
But if you go to, for example, Old Westbury Gardens, and you go up the driveway, at one time I think they said they had 150 of these trees planted just on that one driveway. Those trees are massive. So picture, I have one and it takes up my entire lawn now, but they make linden tea out of it. It has a fragrant blossom that comes out. Once a year I wait for the tree. 2 weeks I get out of my car and go. So it's one of those, it's a quirky, and it was a German man, because the linden tree, there's a Unter den Linden Boulevard in Berlin. The community was made up of very, very diverse people, which was also kind of fun. So, but it was also made up of people who had gone to high school here and their parents had gone to high school here. So you had the old guard, and then you had the newcomers.
Do you know whose estate your property was?
I do not. I do not know that, but I do know that the actress comedian Martha Ray, who was a very famous actress comedian back in the day, had her house there and had a nightclub that she made out. She was on the water, and because it's a community that borders the water, and she had a nightclub that she had made where Sid Caesar lived here at that time. Joan Crawford lived here. Alan King. So she would have these soirees with her entertainment friends, and right down the street. I wasn't here then, but it's kind of a tickle for me to be there. The offices that we occupy right now on Middle Neck Road, by the way, were called the United Artists office because Charlie Chaplin had his United Artists company formed in that space, and that I thought it was sort of poetic that we ended up there with our film festival and everything. And Charlie Chaplin lived in Great Neck Estates when he was married to Paulette Goddard.
Mm.
So there was a lot of cultural history, and they had an extra train on the Long Island Railroad back in the 30s to accommodate all the Broadway performers who lived out here and who needed a train that took them at the time that their shows were over, which was an hour later than the last train. So they actually did that. So it was a very very culturally diverse and active and dynamic, supported by the Gold Coast, named the Gold Coast because of it would be billionaires who built their cottages along the coast, including the Chrysler Cottage, which turned into the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, but which had been built by Henry Bendel of the Henry Bendel, late lamented, department store.
Now, I don't know which way to go with this, Historical Society or Gold Coast Art Center. So I think
Well, we became a part of the history because of all these tremendous performers. We had, for example, Tully Filmus. Now, you may not know Tully Filmus, but I promise you know his imagery and his work. Was an artist who's lived here, whose work is still in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. His wife, Gladys Filmus, there's a name. Gladys, I met both of them. They were at the tail end of their lives and careers, but they lived here, and they were she was a dancer. She was part of the one who everybody knows.
Ziegfeld?
No. He was an entrepreneur. He was a theater man. No. It'll come to me probably tomorrow, but I'll let you know. But anyway, she was a professional dancer, and they, as a community of artists living here, Louise Nevelson taught here. Louise Nevelson's altarpiece is still on display at Temple Bethel. You had Helen Frankenthaler, one of the major female artists, American female artists, who also lived here. So many people. And of course the famous F. Scott Fitzgerald, everybody knows. But there were plenty of artists and writers and painters and dancers and everybody. They came together in the 1950s to form the North Shore Community Arts Center. The North Shore Community Arts Center was why I came here. So they tied it right up.
And so tell me then about how you got involved and how Gold Coast Art Center became what we know of it today.
The first thing I did when I got here, after I dropped one off at nursery school and one off at kindergarten, was I ran to the North Shore Community Arts Center. As an artist, I thought I could volunteer and do something, and I came in, and the North Shore Community Arts Center's home, the building, is the present Young Israel on Middle Neck Road. So went in there, the executive director, who was very dynamic and who recognized a volunteer when she saw one, put me to work as an artist making posters before computers. Remember, there were no cell phones, no computers. This is 1976. So everything was by hand, and I had come out of the commercial advertising business as an illustrator, so they wanted me. And I would bring my children there for classes, and it was a very comfortable environment. I went to the High School of Music and Art. It was exactly the same kind of an environment. Art, music, dance, theater, all under one roof. Loved it. Within 2 years, they sold the building and left. What? I said. So, well, somebody's going to reopen it somewhere else. For a while they did, and they were at the St. Paul's Church. And I taught there for a while, so for a while I did that. And then they left the church, and that was that. So I don't know how I got into it, but I ended up in conversations with Tom DiNapoli, who was then the assemblyman, and who is today our New York State Controller, and the then mayor, Bob Rosegarten. And if you don't remember Bob Rosegarten, Tom DiNapoli, Richard Aranella were the triumvirate of, Richard Aranella was the superintendent of parks. The three of them united as a group were unstoppable. And Bob Rosegarten came out of an art background himself, and he said, I want you in my village. I want to see an art center here. Let's do some talks. I'm going to put you in front of different groups, and you're going to talk about your idea for an art center. I said, sure. I said, that's easy. So began the process of restoring, which is what I thought I'd be doing, and this would have been in 95, no, it would have been 86, 1985, 1986, somewhere in there. And we had town hall meetings at his town hall, his village hall down in Great Neck Plaza. People came, but then there were the people who said, what do we need an art center for? We have Great Neck House. I said, you may have Great Neck House, but I don't. Not because my community doesn't have privileges in any of those in the Great Neck community. My community pays taxes, even though we're all the way over by the water, pays taxes to the town of North Hempstead. So I don't get to use the ice skating rink. I don't get to, my kids don't have access. So actually, that's not true. I said, you're looking at a community that's very bifurcated, if I may use the word, where you have north and south, high schools, temples, other kinds of civic organizations, north and south. So you could grow up here all your life and never meet a kid who lives south or meet a kid or vice versa. And you certainly won't meet anybody from Queens or beyond your border of Great Neck. So it's a very insulated kind of growing up. That goes for the adults as well. So I think that we should have an art center where everybody's welcome, and we'll make it as affordable as possible and free where we can. And I think that's a great idea. And so I took my great idea and I started peddling it around at Lions Club, Rotary, you name it. I was up at the crack of dawn to make these meetings at 8 o'clock. And before long, there was sort of a groundswell. It was I'm not literally, it's not grass, but it was a grassroots operation, and grassroots support emerged. And by the time 1994 rolled around, the mayor had declared May to be Art Center Month, even though there was no art center yet. And by 1995, we had raised enough money through a variety of efforts to go and know that we had enough money to support 6 months of rent at the church. And the only reason we chose the church, and you know that's the one on St. Paul's Plaza, is because they actually had a dance room with a dance floor, a big one. So we used that as an all-purpose room. Had no gallery, only had 2 rooms we could use, one for the office and one for studio that had to be turned over every hour. But we did it and put it out in the newspapers that new art center, come one, come all, on the very first day. Now, we opened in January of 1995, which means that we're exactly 30 years old as of this past January. And 250 kids showed up. 250 kids we were dealing with registration that we weren't prepared to deal with. And we were booked instantly and already had money to plan for a for a fall. We didn't have a summer. We needed to figure it out.
What kind of programs did you have initially?
Everything was art-based, but no gallery. So we were not allowed to put things on the wall. So we had to just use the studio that they had. And so art, dance. I managed to persuade Steinway Pianos, which never loans pianos, ever. I talked to the man, because when you're ignorant, ignorance truly is bliss. I had no idea what I was doing. So I said, let me see, maybe they have a piano that they would loan us. And he laughed, and he said, I have to tell you, we never loan pianos. But my wife is from Port Washington originally, so I'd like to help you. I said, that's great, because I expected it. So he loaned us a grand piano, and we created a program called the 88 Keys program. You could buy a key, and towards the purchase of the entire piano. And so people were buying chords, and it became a thing. So we had our first piano. So we had music lessons in there on the piano, on the violin, or on the guitar. And then the dance, they had this beautiful dance studio that neighborhood people were using for exercise. We had our first. Now, how did we get our first dance teacher, you ask, since I do not come out of a dance background? Well, at one of these town hall meetings, and everybody who knows me has heard this story because I thought it was magical. It was at the Village Hall in Great Neck Plaza. Bob Rosegarten, he of the handlebar mustache, was hosting this for us. And he gave an impassioned plea that this community lost the North Shore Community Art Center. It was 15 years later. We need to restore it. And it was all over. And I noticed in the back, there was a woman sitting there. It was at night. She was wearing dark sunglasses and a rain hat and a raincoat, even though it wasn't raining. So I said, And so after it was all over, till the last human was departing, she came up to me, and she had a heavy Russian accent. And she looked at me and she said, and she had ramrod posture, she looked at me and she said, I like your aura. I said, my what? My aura. She liked my aura. I said, really? What color is it? is pink. I said, oh, okay. And so she said, my name, Natasha Frischer. Natasha Frischer had been a ballerina in Russia with the Kirov Ballet, became a choreographer for the Kirov Ballet and a teacher in the Vaganova School, I think that's how it's pronounced. And she and her husband, who was a heart transplant surgeon, he was Jewish, she was not, but they emigrated to Israel. She didn't like it there, so they came to America. And he was working as a surgeon at Stony Brook. So they lived way out there, but she got a job working for another ballet school here in Great Neck. She hated it. She ended up founding her own ballet school in Bayside, 65 dancers. 65 dancers in that time was a lot to have out here. And she came to me, she says, I give you my whole school. She literally brought all of her students. She said, this is our home. We're going to have class here. And I have a photograph of her, which I will bring you, that shows her teaching a whole bar from beginning to end, one boy, but all the girls at the bar and practicing, and she's doing what Russian teachers do. She was great. She was just fantastic. And
Do you know if does her school still exist in some form?
She gave it to me. So what our dance program is the legacy of Natasha's dance program. The irony being, we had wonderful on toe, we still do, but the ballet program that what she had envisioned became overtaken by the attraction of suburban girls to raunchy hip hop from the city, from the ghetto. And so hip hop became the go-to dance form, and we had a dance teacher for that, who himself had come to me with a story. He had been a football player, professional football player, who was doing an exhibition game in Europe when he injured himself, and in the rehab, because they're so muscle bound, they gave them dance. And this is for people, if anybody ever sees this, if you want to be flexible, take dance, absolutely take dance. So they rehabbed him. In the process, he fell in love with the idea of dance, came to America, stopped playing football. His body type completely changed. When I met him, he was still the Hulk, but later on his body type changed, and he became a teacher. But we were the first place where he taught. He said, I've never taught before, but I know I can do it. I said, I've got a license in teaching art. I'll sit in on your classes, and I'll give you some tips if you're willing to take them, because I can't have somebody who's never taught teaching. And that's how it worked. I mentored a lot of teachers who were professionals in their fields, but who were not professionals in the sense that I had gotten an arts, I got a master's in arts education and one in studio art. Very, very different. You still have to get the whole education license. He didn't have that, but it didn't matter because I wasn't advertising that. I was advertising people who still practice the art form that they're teaching and who will bring you the latest and greatest in their field.
What was his name?
His name still is Lancelot Theobald. Lance Theobald.
Does he still teach with you?
Lance Theobald got into the movies eventually, but I believe he still teaches. He teaches, I think he lives with his wife and children out east, but he comes every so often, and he did a testimonial for us. And I mean, he was great. He was always great. He taught with us, still occasionally shows up, but it's okay. We have the new blood from the city teaching that art form, and it's still very, very popular. He also taught tap dance. I mean, really, we did a workshop, which brings us to another thing. So 1995, we opened our doors. 1996, thanks to Robert Zimmerman, he was sitting on the board of the Kennedy Center in Washington at the time. He came to me and he said, I'm going to put you together with Dr. Shine, who was the superintendent of schools. And he said, I think that you should write something up about the Art Center and what your hopes are and so forth. And I'm going to see if I can get you the schools, Great Neck Schools, as a partner. I said, a partner for what? He said, as a partner at the Kennedy Center, which has just created, I think a couple of years earlier, an educational institute called Partners in the Arts, schools and art centers. He said, since you're the only one probably in Nassau County, he said, I'm going to put you two together if he's willing. And Dr. Shine was one of those very open to new suggestions, very willing to put things in place. And he said, okay, we will do that with you. This was 1996. So if you get accepted to be an affiliate of the Kennedy Center, well, A, we were accepted, so A, thank God I can write, and B, we got Arlette Sanders, who was then the associate superintendent in charge, assistant superintendent in charge of secondary education, so the number 2 person pretty much in the educational framework of Great Neck, to go with me. And it required a week in Washington, D.C., where every single day from breakfast until you fell into your bed, you were exposed to the best and the brightest in national arts and arts education, addressed in big ballrooms with there were 600 people. And it was really the most fun and excitement, because you could be sitting next to me and you're from Kentucky, or you're from Arkansas, or you're from some northern little village in California or New York State, and you all have different experiences in arts, mostly the performing arts, but we represented visual as well. And they taught us how. They basically said, this is what you need. So, how do you integrate? It was all about integrating the arts into mainstream curriculum. So it's not like, okay, kids, you've had the important subjects. You've had English and math and science and blah, blah, blah. Now we're going to let you go down to the art room for about 45 minutes. Well, this model wasn't in existence when I was a kid. When I was a kid, art, music was part of your curriculum daily in New York. So what happened? Does everybody remember what happened? Does everybody have a sense of the history of the arts in America? Sputnik happened. Do you know what Sputnik was? Sputnik was the satellite that the Soviet Union launched before us and freaked out the government under Eisenhower, who declared emphasis to be held from now on math and science. Arts and humanities can take a little, and it took a long time for them to phase us out, but they phased us out pretty successfully in terms of status in the curriculum and status maybe in the minds of parents. So there we were, and that made what I do either less important or more important depending on how you felt about it. Fortunately, most parents who want their children to have a well-rounded education thought it was more important. We discovered that we created curriculum where we did workshops for teachers. We bypassed the parents. Workshops for teachers, because they're in the classroom with kids. That's the philosophy of the Kennedy Center. They're in the classroom with kids all day. You want them to have exposure, get their attention on the arts. These could be teachers who never, ever had to do more than a half a credit of art to get through their entire education, through secondary education. The Kennedy Center says, we know that you can do this. So everything was structured for teachers. And they would invite local DC or Virginia teachers to participate in the workshops in Washington so we could see how it looked. We came back here. I brought back everything that I learned. 1996 was the first time I went, and I kept going straight through until, I think, 2000. And then I started to send my director of school down there. But we could show you how to use dance to teach, what was it? We were teaching biology. There was a phenomenal workshop. Dance, we have it. And we showed you, do you know how you can do that? Would you like to take a dance class and learn biology, 4th grade biology at the same time? We can do that. And it was fun. And the teachers thought it was fun, so they said, oh. And it gets the kids up out of their chairs and gets them physical. You want them to be physical. And we learned it from a dancer in Indianapolis who made the same connection. And so here's how, I'm going to give you a quick, if you want to use it, if you just cut me out if you don't like this, but I personally think it's fab, one of the best ideas we ever had. So picture 60 administrators of either art centers or schools, used to wearing, today anything goes, but used to wearing suits and ties and, more business clothing attire, and told that you have to wear something comfy because you're going to be going in. 60 of you are in this big room, And you get in walks this guy wearing, shaking his head and getting himself all loose and relaxed, and says that you should do the same. And everybody self-consciously says, okay. And then says, okay, I'm going to count you out. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Went around the circle like that. Okay, all the ones go over there. All the twos go over there. All the threes. You get the picture. Prior to that, he had us warm up with little physical exercises like, okay, pretend you're a drop of water. This is an old acting thing. Pretend you're a drop of water. Now freeze, you're ice. So now whatever you were doing, do something and freeze. So you freeze. And he says, okay, now melt. You're going to be water again. And you're melting down to the ground. And now you're steam. What happens now? And then you do that. Okay, so that was pretty much, that was just fun, wasn't it? No, you just learned the water cycle. So that's number one. The next thing he did, he would come and he whispered to everybody in their little 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 groups, you're going to do the circulatory system. You're going to do the nervous system. You're going to do the digestive system, and so forth. My group ended up, there was one big man in this group, and the rest of us were, we were just regular sized people. He was big. And so we were the circulatory system. And they had not had a background in theater, and I kind of had. So I said, okay, here it goes. How about if we make a choo-choo train, and it'll be the bloodstream? Hold on to each other now. You're going to go through, and you're enormous. You're going to be the heart, right? I said, well, what movement would you suggest for a heart? Pump. Men know how to pump. They know how to pump. So he was pumping. They were traveling. And then they looked at me and said, what are you going to be? I said, I'm going to be the clot. So they went around the heart, and I'm just standing there watching, just standing there minding my own business, because we had to do it for the rest of them. We only had 15 minutes to do this. And they went around, and then when they finally went around, one of them was jostled me. I disconnect from where I am, get on the train, of the blood train, and now we go to the heart, and I pull back my fist and I punch him, and he freezes. And everybody in the room, heart attack, circulatory system. And that was that. Now picture fourth graders getting the sense of how that works. It works. And we did it with everything. So that's the philosophy, is integrating the arts into the curriculum, not just arbitrarily saying, oh, go ask the art teacher if she could help you do a poster. It's actually doing it together. It's a phenomenal philosophy, and I wish every school, they have a magnet school in Washington that the entire school adopted it. So it's great, but we don't have nearly enough of those.
Do you still teach that in some capacity?
We don't get requests from school budgets, don't seem to support, because they would have to pay for, the whole entire thing. And I think it wasn't even all that expensive, but I think they don't even have the time. I think they have so many other things that they consider to be more important. So no, but we can still do it. We have done it as recently as a few years ago. We were doing it in Port Washington for a while and so on, but to be truthful, I haven't checked to see if we've had any requests. I don't think we have. But you're welcome to a request.
What are some of the other highlights of the Art Center over the years?
Well, that's the school. When we decided to stay open in the summer. So we decided we should be open when the schools are closed. So discovered that not every kid goes to Florida for Christmas. So we're open whenever the schools are closed. We call it vacation arts. And our teachers were happy to have a job during those times. So we have days, it's a camp that takes place at those times, Easter, Christmas, President's Week, summertime, we're open. So we ended up becoming 7 day a week, 365 days a year pretty much, except for a couple of the religious holidays. But we're open for the rest of those holiday weeks. So it's just, it just boomed, blossomed, and we found a niche. We discovered that we were getting kids from everywhere. Suddenly kids were making friends with kids they'd never ever meet otherwise. And we didn't get the adults. And I wasn't actually as interested in the adults personally, because you have adult ed in Great Neck. which is one of the assets of the community. I taught painting in adult ed for 14 years during the time that I was building the art center. And it's inexpensive. You can't compete. So I found boutique teachers who were master teachers that you're not getting at adult ed. And you wouldn't have the skill set to learn from them anyway. So I would bring in these more exotic kinds of workshops. Then we discovered that we have a program for people who suffer from cognitive disabilities, memory loss, and Alzheimer's. And it's called Making Memories. And we were supporting something that we knew would help, because sometimes something can trigger a memory even in somebody who's damaged. It could be music, it could be a film, it could be anything. But we decided we were going to create, and we worked with the Alzheimer's Association, and we have been doing this now for several years. And we have busloads of people coming from either with their caregivers or their spouses or their children. And you can see when they walk in that, you know, they're happy to some express joy, but they have no idea where they are or what they're here for. And by the time it's over, we'll have a musician up there. The age group tends to be skews older, and they play the music that they remember. There was one, and I love to use examples because it brings it tighter. There was one couple who came every time we had this couple would show up. The wife would bring the husband, and he never spoke. He sat and he sat just kind of deadpan, and she would sit with him and he would talk to the other people, and they became social. Well, one day we had a guy who got them on their feet. We're dancing today, and it was 1940s music, I think. And there was a slow dance, and as I looked around, I always jump in as one of the highlights is to go in and see them. There I saw this couple dancing. I said, "That's so nice," but she was crying. Why is she crying? I mean, crying. So waited, the dance was over, they sat down. Afterwards, when everybody was getting ready to leave, I said, "I hope you don't mind, but I noticed that you were crying after your dance, during your dance." She said, "You don't understand." She said, "My husband hasn't said a word in 2 years. He got up and he said, 'Would you like to dance?'" That was the first thing he said to her in 2 years. So she was like, it triggered whatever it triggered. And that's the kind of thing that you hear all the time, to the point that a professor of medicine at Cedars-Sinai in California, it's a different hat that I wear, is the film hat, but I was connected to her because she had heard about this, and she said, "Can you give me data?" I said, "No, I can't tell you that I'm doing this in an organized fashion, but I can give you anecdotal data for sure." And she wanted it, and she uses it, so it's very encouraging for them, how they would be able to do that. But that's what I mean about the arts. I believe so passionately that a life without arts is like living in a prison with gray walls and gray thoughts and gray everything. It brings you light and color and the opportunity to think thoughts that you typically are not encouraged to think. And I don't mean politically. I mean creating. Maybe I should write a book. Maybe I can write a poem. Maybe I could write lyrics to a song. Maybe I'm Mozart. Whatever it is, you're encouraged to think like that outside of the box through the arts. And so that's why we continue to go on. Whatever else you'd like to know, I can give you those stories until the cows come home.
Yeah, you touched on the film festival. Talk about that.
Well, we didn't have the opportunity until 1995. When we first opened in the church, we actually had the Squire Theater, the late lamented Squire Theater, I might add, was downstairs. So all we had to do was come downstairs. Well, again, through the stars align, the planets align, and the man who built, I was an independent theater operator named Warren Würzburg. So in 1995, Warren was rebuilding the theater, and the same engineer architect who was rebuilding his theater, which took until 1997, was building us. we were moving from the church in 97 to this building. That's a whole other story. So that was, he gave me the theater. So that was an amazing opportunity. Prior to that, we were using the theater at North Shore Towers. Now, I don't know about you, but nobody who's living on the north end of town is going to go in traffic to North Shore Towers at that time of evening. Like, to get there at 7 o'clock, you'd have to leave by 6, back up dinner, not happening. So what we did, and we ended up with a nice house. We had like 500 people show up for the very first film that we showed, and we had, through technology that existed, we were able to show a film called The Perez Family, 1995, and it starred Angelica Houston, Alfred Molino, and Marissa Tomei in one of her first roles. So this screen was bigger than this whole room. It was a massive, tall, 3-story screen that they had at the time for 500 people. It was like real old Hollywood kind of screen. The man who owned that theater happened to sit next to my husband in Temple. So he said, I read about your wife in the paper. If she needs anything about films, tell her to call me. And his name was Sidney, and I did call him. You can have it, but you're going to have to bring your own people to sell refreshments, and you're going to have to bring your own people for projection. I'll let you have the projectionist. I said, that's actually the most important job, is the projectionist. I said, okay, so now what do? I've never programmed film before. Found a couple of guys who were looking for work. Film industry, you find tons of them. And one of them had been an archivist in Texas, was originally from New Orleans, and he had connections in the industry, and that's what I've discovered, is that the film industry, until recently, was the friendliest, most cooperative, most interested in supporting one another. And so he said, well, the director of this film, the producer-director of this film, is a person named Mira. Now I'm going to forget Mira's last name. She deserves to be remembered. Mira. She's now a famous director, which is all the more shame on me for not remembering her last name. Mira. Let's start with Nair. Mira Nair. And Mira had done this film. She went on to do a film with Denzel Washington called Mississippi Masala, and now she does, she produces. But she did a lot of good film work. This was her first. And the opening night in Miami, because it's about a Cuban family, the Perez family, in Miami, opened in Miami, and she was in front of the red carpet and everything was going on when she got a phone call, and it was from my guy, because they had arranged that she would speak. Now, I held the microphone up to the telephone, which had a wire, and showed that she could answer questions. And after the screening, so this was after the screening of the film, she was outside with cameras and stuff. Excuse me. And she went through this exercise with us for like about 15 minutes. The audience was beyond thrilled. This was absolutely thrilling. The film may or may not have been great, but it didn't matter, because you just had an experience. And it was in the film experience, and I'm sure people were talking about it. And after that, it was no problem to sell tickets to our next films. And we did that until Warren came along and said, here, why don't you just use the Squire? I said, why don't I? So that led to a request from, to give the history. So I was programming film, which, you learn on the job. This was real on-the-job training. Eventually, I taught what I knew to somebody else who took it over and worked with me and made the phone calls and all of that. And she was really good at it. And then we got to a point where I got a request from then legislator Judy Bosworth that Tom Swazi, who was the new county executive at the time, wanted to know if she had any ideas from her constituents for events that could attract visitors, tourists, new residents, business. So she called me up and she said, because she loved what I was doing. I think briefly she sat on our board. And so I said, yes. I said, I have this little thing that I've been looking at. It says, Film Festival. Now, since 1997, I've been looking at that thing. So she says, well, open the folder and tell me how to do this. I said, we can do this. So we brought in Caroline Sorokov, who had just started working for me not too long before, and she's a bright person. And so I said, let's make this happen. Put it together. So in 2010 we were supposed to open, and I named it the Gold Coast Film Festival. Why? Because that was the name historically. People weren't using Gold Coast. Now everybody uses Gold Coast. It's mine. Because they were using North Shore. Everything was North Shore Towers, North Shore this, North Shore that. North Shore Auto became Gold Coast Auto. But in those days, everything was North Shore Community Arts Center. Forget it. So I had somebody who was working for me at the time, and she says, oh, that sounds so stuck up. I said, good. I said, I want to, even though we're located like this little space, we're going to sound like we're more than what we are. So Gold Coast Film Festival we became. Tom Swazi loved it. We pitched them what we had, and then he was defeated. So we couldn't bring the film festival in 2010, so now we brought it in 2011, had to do the pitch all over again. But in 2011, the next town supervisor, county executive, said, okay, we're going to do this. We had 5,000 people show up in the course of those, I think it was there for a week, 10 days, something like that, great film you are never going to see out here. You'd have to go to the city, to some of the art houses, and there was a hunger for it. And we always had speakers afterwards to digest the material, to give you the opportunity to say, I really didn't like that film. Why did we see this film? Can you tell me why I wanted to see, why you brought this film? Real, sometimes hostile. And there were times when I thought, glad there were no tomatoes. But still, there was one film that we showed, and it was about Buddhism and Zen, and it was really, I don't know how to describe it to you. If you weren't into it, it was boring. Moving pictures is why they're calling it moving pictures. Nothing moved. But you walked out feeling, well, there are people who didn't walk out. I came in here to look for a film that moves. And so the director came, and the director was the loveliest guy, clearly a practitioner of meditation and stuff. And he got this audience, it was as though he cast a spell over everyone. By the time these formerly cranky people who were going to lynch me walked out of the theater, they said, I feel so relaxed. I'm so glad you had him come to talk to us. That's the education component, and that's what makes a film. We just had a film here. Did you see it? You didn't. The Pawnbroker with Rod Steiger. The Pawnbroker was 1965, and it was a very controversial film for its time. And I brought a professor, Foster Hirsch, who's written 26 or 30 books on film, who's a professor at Brooklyn College forever, 4 or 5 decades. He came to talk to them. That's a privilege. And we gave away tickets because this is the library, but after a while we couldn't give away anymore. You wouldn't be able to see the screen. They didn't move. They were rapt. And he set the film up for them, and he said, I want you to see this scene, and I want you to pay attention to this actor because he puts in a performance that's blah, blah, blah. And he sort of dissected the film and then built it back up for them so that they would see the film. Many of them had never seen it. I had seen it when I was a teenager, and nobody moved. You know how they always go to the bathroom? Nobody left the room. Nobody. It was like squirming, but nobody was leaving the room. And till the end, and they said, wait. Mad rush to the bathrooms, came right back, and he then gave them a college-level film talk that they so appreciated. So that was just the other day. So this is what we continue to do. And now we're working on doing a regular series of vintage films that he can talk to the audience about.
Talk a little bit about your board and your volunteers, your staff.
The volunteers are the lifeblood from day one. In fact, one of my volunteers in 1995 ended up becoming my events coordinator because she had grown up in Great Neck, and nobody knew how to put together an event better than she did, only she didn't know it was a marketable asset. And what should have been just a volunteer position, she could come and go and do what she wanted, she ended up working with me for 30 years.
What's her name?
Ronnie Berger, who had retired 3 years ago to go to Florida. Florida is luckier than we are. But yeah, so the original board was made up, there was one crossover. So Shirley Romaine, the late Shirley Romaine, and I hope you remember her. I actually had the privilege of speaking at her funeral, and I referred to her amazing voice. She had been an actress, and she was an arts activist and an activist in many, a community activist in many ways. And she actually told me, Regina, don't do this. I was on the board of the North Shore Community. It's so hard. Don't do this. You'll be sorry. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. So who doesn't like a challenge? So I did it, and then she was one of the signatories when we went, when we got our not-for-profit, and we are a not-for-profit. Nobody gets rich from working at the Art Center. And so she joined the board, she was one of the first board members. I have two board members, Ralph and Michelle Hyman. Ralph I think he's retired now, but he still does it. An accountant, and he was a managing accountant and partner in a big accounting firm. He took over. What did I know? I knew how to write a check. Didn't know how to balance it, but I knew how to write it. He taught me everything about accounting so that I could manage books and I could figure out, pluses and minuses and plan things not just from an artistic and who's coming kind of way, but from how do we not lose money kind of way. Or if we lose money, was it worth it? Do we think of it as a marketing event? Because that's losing money, losing propositions. And Michelle had been a first grade teacher until she retired from Great Neck Schools at the Lakeville School. And so she was always able to talk about, what would children want to have and what should we be looking for to entertain them or to get them involved. So that was them. And there was my husband, who's the unsung hero of the Art Center, because I left a paying job to do this for 5 years without a salary. I said, is that okay? It's fine. And so he basically was the first sponsor of the Art Center. And our home telephone number was the Art Center's telephone number for those 5 years. And that's when I thought he might divorce me. So dinner time, telephone, Mom, telephone, oh God. But eventually we moved and we got everything sorted out. And now he couldn't be prouder. I think that he looks at it as a legacy. And I hope it will be, because I'm not forever. And so I just hope this community will continue to embrace and appreciate it, but not just with their tuition. Because the volunteers are wonderful, and we still have them. They're ushers at the movies. They're ushers at the events. We just had a huge event called, a film called October Hate, that Deborah Messing in Hollywood had produced and gotten an amazing director to direct, and it deals with anti-Semitism on college campuses, and super, super powerful film. And so we needed our volunteers, and we always do. We always have people step up and say, especially when we say, look at it this way, you get to see all these films for free. So that's, but we've had them for years, some of these volunteers. And then we have the interns, the kids who come and help us with the kids who are younger at the vacation arts or summer arts. We've had some over the years. We've had college kids who want to do their theses, their end of the year papers, and shadow us or have us mentor them. We've had I can say the gamut of ages, and we've been very happy with our volunteers. But here's the thing, the volunteer pool is drying up because the younger population doesn't want to work for free, doesn't want to, even if they can, they don't want to do it. It's just a very different attitude towards philanthropy and not of course everyone, but there's more difficulty in securing that kind of participation today from, and I hate to say it, because as I say, is it because you're old? But maybe, but maybe if I were younger, I'd know how to appeal to them. But it's not easy. It's definitely not as easy as it once was. The most support we get is for the film festival. Neiman Marcus is a sponsor. I mean, everybody wants to be affiliated with a glamorous, thing, and film festivals are considered to be glamorous. And we get at the school. The school had to be in existence for 15 years before we made the kind of money that the film festival could make in one. So it's an education, and we make the most of it because that helps us support the school. Now the school is supporting the film festival. We have a great school, but it's an evolution. We've like learned how to balance.
As a closing thought, talk about like one of your or several of your favorite things about Great Neck, or favorite things to do over the decades.
Well, I can tell you this. It was the first time, this has been the first time I ever lived in one place longer than 6 years. So for me, this was an education in what it's like to actually be a fundamental part of a community and to meet people in a different way than if you're living in a building in the city and people come, people go. So it's like that. But I think that Great Neck, with all of its quirks, and this was a community where if you had a charity that you were going to have an event for, 400 people showed up. If you were raising money for Israel bonds or for the veterans or for this or for that, 400 people showed up. This was a very activist community. Yes, it was activist, tended to skew center to the left, but there were former veterans here who on Veterans Day, I used to go over, there was a place where they would meet and they would have mark the occasion and recognize and respect those who perished in service to the country. One of the things that I remember is the opening night, the gala for the first film festival was on the grounds of the Merchant Marine Academy in the mansion that used to belong to Walter Chrysler. So it was a great party, and the Merchant Marines were encouraged to volunteer. So we had them waiting tables and serving wine. They loved that. And all the other things that, the chores that had to be done, but spectacular. And we had what are those, the people who do the 4-part barbershop quartet. Everything was geared back to Gatsby, but in a more meaningful way than just saying, oh, this is what Gatsby wrote. That was a great opening. We had galas. We had Ben Vereen was our last, but we had Robert Wagner and Jill St. John, and we had our first one was Morton Gould, and if nobody knows Morton Gould, they should. Along with Leonard Bernstein, George Gershwin, Morton Gould, and Aaron Copland, he was one of those composers of the 20th century who wrote 1,000 pieces of music, who got the Kennedy Center Honors in 1995, who got the Pulitzer Prize for music, and lived in Great Neck for 40 years, and was the most accessible, and he was lovely to me. He said, Regina, and very earthy, never hire union musicians. I said, really? I didn't even have a reason to hire union or otherwise, but you're going to make something of this art center, and I'm telling you, don't hire union musicians. They'll tie your hands up in a million different ways, which was hilarious to me. But he was a really outstanding person who was genuinely, he was a real person. He wasn't like, oh, I'm a musician, don't talk to me. And a Pulitzer Prize winner and all of that. But very helpful to me when I first started, when I needed that Steinway piano. He said, call them. I said, okay. He didn't call them for me. He says, you can call them. What are they going to say? No. And that became my mantra. What are they going to say? No. That was it. So can you handle the no? I said, I guess. Well, you'll never know if you don't call.
And the rest is history.
The rest really is history. So that's but favorite moments in terms of there are just so many. And most of them have to do with the people now gone. It's like reminds me of John Lennon's song about places I remember all my life and some have changed. What's it called? In my life. In my life. That's the way I look at I look back. I tend never to look back. I tend always to want to look forward because looking back is painful. But when I do look back, I see faces and I see people who were you could learn from, people who had character and energy and morals and ethics that inspired you to be better. So, yeah, this has been a good ride.
Very good. Thanks so much for sharing your story today, Regina.
My pleasure.